Show.
We're going to start here with another state that has put through legislation, and it's been signed by the governor in North Carolina, voter ID laws. And Eric Holder, Barack Obama going crazy, freaking out. They can't stand it. The ACLU and the NAACP, they can't stand it. Apparently, black people are so stupid they don't know how to get a freaking identification card. Who knew? And by the way, if this is a big problem for people in the black community or people in the Hispanic community, well, maybe the NAACP and the ACLU should go into North Carolina, should go into Texas, and set up an office in the black part of town or the inner city or wherever, where the people are who don't seem to be able to get a photo ID, and help them. And if they can't afford it, whatever it costs, $6, $8, $12, I don't care if it's $22. If they can't afford it, then maybe the ACLU and the NAACP should help them. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, they got a lot of money. Help the people out so that they can get a voter ID card, an identification card, and then they can identify themselves and they can vote. This article at Breitbart. North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory just signed a law to safeguard voting rights in the Tar Heel state, and the Obama administration is threatening to sue again. The Supreme Court of the United States has already found that voter ID laws are constitutional. I'm getting sick of this crap. Eric Holder should not be the Attorney General. He should be in freaking prison. And the Republicans in Washington, D.C. are unwilling to have that fight. And so we're still putting up with Eric Holder after, well, Fast and Furious should have sent the guy packing. But every 2 or 3 months, we hear about something else Eric Holder did that's either racist, outright racist, or illegal. And he's still the Attorney General. He's still running the Department of Justice in a very biased and racist manner. North Carolina's new law requires a person attempting to vote to show, 1, a North Carolina driver's license, 2, or, these are actually not numbers, they numbered these. Some people just don't know how to write. It should be either a North Carolina driver's license, or a U.S. passport, or a military ID at the polls to cast their ballot. You wouldn't have to, the way it's written here, it says that all 3 would have to be shown, which is preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. That's Ken Kuklowski writing at Breitbart.com, and he doesn't know how to write. It also ends same-day voter registration and shortens the period for early voting from 17 days to 10 days. Early voting is crap. It's another Democrat Party trick. It's cheating. Early voting should be banned. There is no reason to have early voting. Now, I wouldn't be opposed to having a 48-hour period for voting. Or 2 days, basically, from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, or whenever the hours are, for 2 days instead of 3, and make it Monday and Tuesday or Tuesday and Wednesday. I don't have a problem with that, but you've already got absentee ballots. You can get an absentee ballot weeks ahead of Election Day, and all you have to do is mail it in so that it arrives on Election Day or before. No big deal. The law is supported by over 70% of North Carolinians. That means even some Hispanics and black people agreed too. Well, they must be Uncle Toms and Uncle Tomases. It is a law that recognizes that everyone has a right not to have their vote canceled out by a fraudulent vote. Well, that's a great way to put it. And so states should take measures to safeguard the integrity of the ballot box. In 2008, the Supreme Court, this is the information that apparently Eric Holder knows nothing about. In 2008, the Supreme Court upheld Indiana's voter ID law in its 6-3 decision. It wasn't 5-4, it was 6-3. The Supreme Court decision in Crawford versus Marion County, with even the liberal justice, John Paul Stevens, voting to uphold this requirement. But President Barack Obama is a staunch foe of voter ID laws, and we know why. So is the Democrat Party across the board, citing the liberal talking point that it prevents people from voting. No, it doesn't. It prevents people who shouldn't be voting from voting. It's worth noting that the Supreme Court in the Crawford decision, noted that the plaintiffs could not identify a single voter in the entire state of Indiana that would not be able to vote as a result of the new law. For states that are under the pre-clearance system of Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act, I want you to hear this. Listen carefully. Attorney General Eric Holder has denied Department of Justice approval to requests to adopt voter ID laws. He's never going to approve voter ID laws because Eric Holder, Barack Obama, and the Democrat Party want people who are not legally able to vote to be able to vote. Attorney General Eric Holder has denied Department of Justice approval to requests to adopt voter ID laws. 9 states in the South and parts of another 7 states are operating under Section 5. But in June, the Supreme Court struck down part of the Voter Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder, keeping Section 5, but striking down the Section 4 formula that determines which states fall within the Section 5 pre-clearance system. As a result, Eric Holder is suing in federal court, trying to do an end around the Supreme Court decision and force states back into Section 5. Eric Holder. He is vermin. He's the Attorney General. And there is nothing about Eric Holder that is balanced or in any way blind justice. Eric Holder is a biased, racist human being, a far-left liberal Democrat. North Carolina is the first state to enact a voter ID law since the Shelby County decision. It should come as no surprise that Eric Holder is threatening to sue North Carolina as well. Eric Holder is in the process of suing Texas over voter ID laws as well. Article at foxnews.com, North Carolina's sweeping voter ID law faces legal challenge. North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory on Monday signed into law changes in how residents can vote that includes requiring them to show a photo ID at polling locations, a move that triggered threats of legal action from the NAACP and other groups. The American Civil Liberties Union joined 2 other groups in announcing that they were filing suit against key parts of the package. This comes hours after McCrory said in a statement that he had signed the measure without a ceremony. The Republican governor said in a statement, quote, "Common practices like boarding an airplane and purchasing Sudafed require photo ID, and we should expect nothing less for the protection of our right to vote." McCrory also said that residents overwhelmingly support the common sense law and that North Carolina is following 34 other states in requiring some form of voter ID. At the LATimes.com. You've got 2 lawsuits filed in federal court in North Carolina have challenged the state's new voter ID law, claiming that some of its provisions infringe on voter rights and discriminate against minorities. Oh, no. Well, that can't possibly be, unless it might be, maybe it is. I don't know. I don't live in North Carolina. Maybe it's illegal for minorities to get a photo identification card. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe black people and Hispanic people and Chinese people and, I don't know, Native Americans Maybe it's illegal for those people to have identification cards or driver's licenses or passports. I don't know. I'm guessing. Because how could it be that the NAACP and the ACLU believe that a voter ID law infringes on voter rights and discriminates against minorities unless it is illegal for minorities, and there is some limitation on minorities that they cannot get a photo identification? I suspect that there is no infringement on any minorities, that there is no discrimination against any minorities. All you have to do is go to the DMV or wherever and get yourself an identification card. The suits were filed late Monday in U.S. District Court in Greensboro, North Carolina by the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Association for the Advancement of Liberal Colored People. I love what Rush Limbaugh called them, 20 years ago. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Liberal Colored People. Because it's all about liberalism. It has nothing to do with taking care of anybody who is not liberal. At CBS News, North Carolina sued soon after voter ID bill signed into law. North Carolina Governor Patrick McCrory has signed a sweeping voting reform bill that imposes strict photo identification requirements on the state's 4 to 5 million voters, rolls back the early voting period, and repeals one-stop registration during early voting. McCrory, a Republican elected last November, called the bill, passed by the legislature along party lines on July 25th, a common-sense law that is supported by 70% of North Carolinians. You know, when legislatures vote for voter ID laws, you always see the Democrats voting against it. Democrats are against people identifying themselves in order to vote. Because Democrats want illegal aliens to be able to vote. Democrats want dead people to vote. Democrats don't care if your dog votes. There's another headline here at CBS. Critics say North Carolina's voter ID law will make it hard for them to vote. Oh, I can't wait to see this. It's a video. Boy, am I going to hate this.
Late last night, North Carolina's legislature passed a law requiring a government-issued photo ID in order to vote. North Carolina is the first state to act since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down federal review of state election laws under the Voting Rights Act. Michelle Miller looks at what happens now.
It's taking a step backwards.
NC State sophomore Molly McDonough is among 319,000 North Carolina voters who don't have the photo ID the new bill requires. College IDs won't be accepted.
Okay, this is a sophomore at North Carolina State University. She says that it's a step backwards to require a photo ID to vote.
It's taking a step backwards.
And all she has is a student identification card at North Carolina State University. That's all she has. So she can't drive. She can't go into a bar. She can't go have a drink. She can't buy Sudafed. She can't go on an airplane. Are you kidding me? What the hell is wrong with Molly McDonough? Now, she's a white girl, of course. They went and found a white girl so that they don't start the story with a complaining black person. Look, if you don't have a photo ID, that's your problem. And yes, it makes perfect sense that the student identification card is not used as a photo identification card for voting, for driving, for any identification need. It's not, because anyone can get one. Illegal aliens can get identification cards at colleges because illegal aliens are going to college here. Illegal aliens are being paid by taxpayers to go to college. Illegal aliens are getting in-state tuition rates that American citizens cannot get if they come from Texas and go to North Carolina State University. And I should specify here that I do not know if North Carolina is one of these states that offers in-state tuition to students who are here illegally. You've got illegal aliens who are going to college here in California. Texas is surprisingly another one that gives in-state tuition rates to illegal aliens. So you cannot have a college or university identification card be used as proper identification for voting, because there are far too many people who are here illegally and are not citizens and not legally able to vote.
Beginning in 2016, polling places will accept only a North Carolina driver's license, state ID card, military ID, or U.S. passport. McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair. She felt so strongly she was arrested for protesting inside the state capitol.
This voter ID law is primarily going to affect students and poor people of color.
Okay, I'm trying to keep my anger down because this does make me really angry. I want to make a very important point here. And I'm really tempted, I'll be honest, I'm very tempted to call this woman a stupid bitch. Not the reporter, the college student, McDonough. This is a woman that this decision that she made is so incredibly stupid. And it proves that this has a lot more to do with allowing people who are not legally able to vote the ability to vote. Listen again. I'm really having a tough time expressing myself here because this is so glaringly stupid and so obviously part of the liberal anti-voter identification agenda that I can barely keep control of my emotions. And I don't usually get like that on the show. But I'm ready to explode. Honest to God. Listen again. This is not, I'm not going to play the quote, the audio of this stupid broad who's going to school in North Carolina. And it's not that she's stupid. I don't believe she is this stupid. I believe she is definitely part of the liberal tactic here. The liberal tactic is being employed. She was probably presented to CBS News by liberal Democrats. They didn't just find her. It wasn't fortuitous happenstance.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair. She felt so strongly she was arrested for protesting inside the state capitol.
You know, I'm not going to cut myself short here. I could spend the rest of the hour talking about that portion of this CBS News report.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair.
Okay, she's living without a license. Now let's say she doesn't need a car. She doesn't have a car. She doesn't want a car. She doesn't drive. She never learned how to drive. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want the expense of a car and gasoline and insurance. She rides a bicycle. Fine. By law, she is supposed to have identification. She is supposed to have an identification card. I don't know, maybe she doesn't drink. But if she wants to go to a liquor store and buy a 6-pack of Budweiser, she can't do that with a school ID card. She has no identification, is what she says.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair.
Okay, the time and expense of getting an identification card is unfair. Think about that. It's unfair. It's not fair. Look, first off, life is not fair. All right? But she is complaining because she doesn't have the time. And she doesn't have the money to get an identification card in North Carolina. I am now at the Department of Motor Vehicles website, in North Carolina. Getting an identification card. To get a North Carolina non-driver identification card, you go to any driver's license office and apply.
Dun-da-da-da.
You will need the same proof of age and identity as if you were applying for a first-time driver's license. The current fee for an identification card, you want to take a guess? The fee to get an identification card in North Carolina is not $75. It's not $50. It's not $25. It's not $17.50. It's $10 is all. $10. I think the price being quoted in most of the liberal news stories that you see is $22, and that's probably for a driver's license. Well, you're going to have to pay that if you want to drive a car, whether or not you're going to use it to vote. So don't cry about this this fee, $10. But I'm not done yet analyzing this short piece of this CBS News report.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair.
Okay, now follow me here. It's going to take way too long in her busy college schedule for her to get a photo ID, and it's going to cost too much money. Well, we already know that it's a whopping $10. You're going to school, you're going to college, your parents are helping pay, you've got student loans, whatever. You can spend $10 freaking dollars. But she wants to complain about time and expense? Listen again to this clip I'm focusing on. Listen again.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair. She felt so strongly she was arrested for protesting inside the state capitol.
Okay, so she doesn't have time and she doesn't have the wherewithal to get a $10 photo identification card, but she can protest. She's got the time to waste protesting, and she's got the money to pay for being arrested. That's not free. That costs money. The police don't arrest you and then send you home and don't charge you any money. It costs money to get out of jail. I don't know how much, but I would bet $10 that it's more than $10. This drives me crazy.
McDonough doesn't have a license and complains the time and expense of getting an ID is unfair. She felt so strongly she was arrested for protesting inside the state capitol.
Okay, well, that's why I felt like saying that she's a stupid bitch. And I know I shouldn't call women, even women I disagree with, even someone this stupid, even someone this agendized, this obvious about being a part of the liberal anti-voter identification movement. I still shouldn't call women bitches on the show. That brings the quality of the show down. But it's very hard. It's very hard because this reporter is telling you that this poor student is having a very difficult time because it's going to take time out of her busy day, and it's going to take money to get a voter identification card. It's going to take $10 whole. Meanwhile, she has enough spare time that she can go protest at the state capitol long enough and be a big enough pain in the ass that she ends up getting arrested. I'm sorry, Ms. McDonald, but screw you. I'm not buying it. Not at all. There's a lot more to this report, but I want to start the show officially. And it's not really a start. It's like a break now. 26 minutes in. But you're listening to The Jimmy Z Show right here at thejimmyzshow.com. And we'll continue with this topic. We might end up spending the whole hour on it because I'm sick to death of Eric Holder. I'm sick to death of Barack Obozo. I'm sick to death of the NAACP and the ACLU. We have a Supreme Court decision in Indiana that says voter ID laws are constitutional. They cannot be stopped. And still, Obama and the Department of Justice, led by Eric Holder, are going after any state that dares to enact voter identification laws. And one of the other things that they mention, and I don't want to forget this, but one of the other things, that's why I'm going to talk about it now. One of the other things that they mention in this report that you're going to hear as we move through the rest of it. It's only 2.5 minutes, but it's going to take me an hour to go through it. They talk about the fact that they can't find but one instance of a fraudulent vote, a fraudulent voter being attempting to vote in North Carolina. I said that very poorly. They have one example, apparently, of a voter trying to vote in North Carolina illegally, fraudulently. And is this really a big problem? You're going to hear the reporter talking to a Republican legislator, and she's going to say, is this really a problem that we need to worry about? First off, one instance of voter fraud is too many. But more importantly, what is this idea that we have to wait until there's a really big problem before we do something about it? Oh, we should have, where should that line be drawn? I wish I could talk to the reporter. I may try to see if CBS News has a contact email for their reporters, because I would like to ask, where is the line, according to you, where we should start doing something about voter fraud? Is it 100 times every election? Is it 1,000 times every election? Apparently, it's not a problem until it becomes a problem, and we shouldn't do anything about it. We should not have a voter identification law until we really need it. When there's thousands of people voting illegally and changing the election results illegally and putting people into office illegally who are going to be against voter identification, then we should try to do something about it. I'm sorry. That makes no sense. There is no reason why we should not have voter identification laws now. No reason at all. And the fact is that just because there are not a whole lot of instances of voter fraud is not an argument for not having voter identification laws. Duh! It's just not that hard. So it's Jimmy Z, the big Jimmy Z show, way into it already. Okay, I'm looking around at the North Carolina Department of Transportation and their various pricing, and a driver's license is only $4 a year. So I'm not sure what the original cost would be for a first-time driver's license. It's not going to be more than, I don't know, identification card is $10, maybe it's $14. Who knows? But it's not too much for that stupid college woman to be able to afford. It's Jimmy Z, the big Jimmy Z show. If you want to contact the show for any reason whatsoever, the email address is jz@thejimmyzshow.com. And if you want to call and record your comments for playback on the next day's show, that phone number is 714-905-9591. We're going to continue where we left off. In this CBS News, it's not a special report. I almost said special report. It's just a CBS News report about how difficult it's going to be for a woman in college and for this older woman. I think she's, how old is she? 76. And she's a black woman, and I'm sorry, she's not too sharp. She's not, she's been fed a bunch of bull by the Democrats, and she believes that the Republicans are trying to take her right to vote away. It's really sad. So I'm going to back up just a couple of seconds here, and we're going to listen to a little bit more from Ms. McDonough.
She felt so strongly she was arrested for protesting inside the state capitol.
This voter ID law is primarily going to affect students and poor people of color, who are the people who primarily vote Democrat.
Okay, this is really easy, and I'm going to solve a problem for her. All she has to do is get her ID card. All the poor people have to do is get their ID cards. All the minority people have to do, who are worried about this, all they have to do is get their ID card. Most of them, I'm not really sure that these people don't have identification cards anyway. They're just pretending. They're acting like, oh, well, I don't have an ID card, and it's going to be a terrible expense for me to get one. What they're doing is they're running cover for people who want to vote illegally. But seriously, it's not any kind of imposition to spend $10 and get an identification card. It's that quick. And then so if the Democrats are worried about, Democrats are going to be affected, how can Democrats be so stupid as to be running around without identification? Why is it that the Democrats are the boneheads without identification cards, without driver's licenses, or any kind of identification? How can that be? How can they cash a check? How can they buy groceries with a check? It's impossible. So I'm not buying it. But if they're worried, then all they need to do is make sure that the Democrats who want to vote in the next election have identification. That needs to be their cause.
Republican State Senate leader Phil Berger denies that. He voted for a bill that passed on party lines.
Your state elections board said that they've only had one documented case of voter impersonation fraud in 2012. You say
the important thing is enhancing confidence in elections.
Yes, the American people need to know that our elections are not being run like some stupid-ass third world country where nobody trusts the elections at all. And I don't care if it means we need to paint fingers blue after people vote. Whatever it takes to secure the electoral process. There is no reason why, I already talked about this in great detail, but there is no reason why we need to sit back and wait until the problem becomes huge. We need to solve this problem now. We need to make sure that the people who are voting in America are legally able to vote.
This is something that is about making sure that when people show up to vote, they are who they say they are.
According to North Carolina's Board of Elections, a third of voters here without a photo ID are African American, including 78-year-old Alberta Curry.
All right, now get a load of this woman. I do not have any sympathy for her at all. If she doesn't know how to get a $10 identification card, maybe she shouldn't be voting. Listen.
It's been a lot of red tape. I have tried and tried.
What does that mean? I spent a lot of red tape. She doesn't even know what red tape is. She spent a lot of red tape, and she tried, but apparently she could not get an identification card. I'm not buying it. Even if she did have to spend a lot of red tape. I'm not buying it.
It's been a lot of red tape. I have tried and tried.
Oh, brother. We're being played here.
She's voted in every presidential election since 1956. Like many of her generation, Curry was born at home and has no birth certificate.
Okay, well, we need to figure out a way to get her an identification card. If she's been there all this time, she must have some documents that prove that she's been there since she was born, 76 years.
Are you frustrated?
I won't have no rights if I can't vote.
Yeah, if I can't vote Democrat, I won't have any more free stuff.
Nigga, please.
I'm going to get in trouble for that. I'm going to get in trouble for using that. But that's from Chris Rock, baby. That's a black man's comedy bit. Anyway, so now the reporter goes back to the Republican legislator.
Are you concerned that those people are simply going to be stripped of their right to vote?
Listen to the way she asks that question.
Are you concerned that those people are simply going to be stripped of their right to vote?
That is so whiny. And she's trying to be emotional. She's so concerned about these people. She's on the verge of tears.
Are you concerned that those people are simply going to be stripped of their right to vote?
I'm not concerned that people will be stripped of their right to vote. I am concerned that people are talking about there being a substantial problem with this that I don't agree exists.
North Carolina's governor plans to sign the bill next month, but it's expected to face legal challenges long before its implementation. Michelle Miller, CBS News, Raleigh.
Okay, so this report was from a couple of months ago, I guess. They tried to stir the passions of North Carolinians, trying to prevent this from happening. That was July 26th. But of all the ridiculous points during that CBS News report, the worst was the college student. The woman who said that she can't spare the time and she can't spare the expense, but she went protesting against it and got arrested at the state capitol. She's got time and money for that. Please, cut the freaking crap, okay?
Please cut the okay?
Okay, the NAACP is vowing to fight the North Carolina voter identification law because black people have a very difficult time getting identification cards, I guess.
This bill is not about voter ID. It is 57 pages of regressive, unconstitutional acts to rig and manipulate elections through voter suppression.
Nigga, please.
Okay, this guy is from the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Liberal Colored People. He's talking about rigging elections. The Democrats have been rigging elections and attempting all these different tactics to rig elections. No voter identification? That's a Democrat tactic to rig elections. Early voting for 2, 3, or 4 weeks? That's a tactic enacted by Democrats to rig elections. Instant voter registration on the spot before you vote? Before the state even has time to review the document that you signed? That's a Democrat tactic for the purpose of rigging elections. So yes, I stand by that woman who said, nigga, please.
Governor Curry and the North Carolina legislature are on the wrong side of history. That's right. They are committing a crime against democracy and our most sacred constitutional values.
There is nothing that these liberal Democrats care about less than the Constitution. And every time they use the word Constitution, every time they talk about the Constitution, they are using it for their own nefarious purposes. They are not interested in protecting the Constitution. Barack Obama and Eric Holder have not spent one day since Barack Obama was elected and took office in January of 2009. Obama has not spent one day defending the U.S. Constitution.
This anti-voting rights bill tramples on the blood of our martyrs, desecrates the graves of freedom fighters, and in the 21st century lines up with the extreme racially driven philosophy of interposition and nullification. It is an outright attempt to manipulate voting and the result of voting through suppressing the African American vote and the votes of others that expand the electorate in ways not often favorable to the support of a narrow and extreme political agenda.
Okay, look, here's a very simple idea for you in the NAACP. Why don't you get to work, get into the poor neighborhoods that you really don't know that well, get inside those poor neighborhoods where all of these black people are walking around with no identification, and get them identification cards. Get them proper state identification. Because I got to tell you, voter identification laws are constitutional. And if someone, you want to talk about being on the wrong side of history, you're really going to be ticked off when you end up losing. And it's not, I don't think it's even going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court again. The Supreme Court has already ruled. They're not going to issue a ruling that contradicts the previous ruling because they don't have any documentation to prove or to show that that previous ruling was done in error.
We will fight this race-based, immoral, and regressive bill with everything we have, and we know we will be victorious.
Apparently this guy is like Eric Holder. He doesn't know anything about the Supreme Court ruling for Indiana, finding that Indiana's voter ID laws were constitutional. That appears to be something that a lot of liberal Democrat black people have no idea exists. Okay, I got some great audio here from Fox News. What you're going to hear is audio from a short clip of audio from the governor of North Carolina. Then you're going to hear a short clip from the guy we just heard from, the head of the NAACP in North Carolina. And then you have quick commentary from Juan Williams and Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal, both African Americans. I want to point that out because, race is so important. I want to make sure that everybody knows that you've got Juan Williams on the left, and then you've got this Jason Riley guy who's on the right. He's conservative. He is pro-voter ID laws, and he's African American. How can that be? Apparently, he was able to finagle some kind of identification card, which apparently is quite an accomplishment for an African American.
Many of those from the extreme left who have been criticizing photo ID are using scare tactics. They're more interested in divisive politics than ensuring that no one's vote is disenfranchised by a fraudulent ballot.
This bill is not about voter ID. It is 57 pages of regressive, unconstitutional acts to rig and manipulate elections through voter suppression.
And moments after it was signed, the legal challenges began. Let's talk about it now with our panel. All right, we've got this new law in North Carolina. It's not just about voter ID, but it cuts down early voting, same-day registration, all kinds of things. Juan, do you think it will withstand legal muster?
No. There are lots of, and when I look at the polls, most Americans support voter ID. Mm-hmm. Most Americans are pretty clear in their thinking that if you have to, as Governor McCrory said, show some ID to get in the airport or to get...
Buy cold medicine.
Anything. Yeah, that you should be required to. Now, the difference in my mind is, of course, that voting is a constitutional right and that you shouldn't have any impediment to pursue your constitutional rights.
Okay, once again, showing ID, being able to identify yourself is not an impediment. It's not an imposition to being able to vote.
But again, this is something way beyond that, as we just heard from that civil rights advocate, Reverend Barber, I believe, in which he said, you're limiting, I think you're going from 17 days of voting down to 10. You're if you change your address now, you have to make the change in terms of your ID within 25 days. The hours of voting are constrained. I mean, this really is an effort to suppress the vote. I don't know how you get away from that, and I don't know how any judge, to answer your question, Shannon, wouldn't see it as such.
I think I maybe saw an eye roll from Jason.
No. Polite disagreement is what you saw. That was the expression I was going for. But the problem here is that there's no evidence that laws of this sort actually suppress the black vote. Black voter participation has been going up. It's been trending up, a trend that began before Obama. In last year's presidential election, black voter turnout exceeded white voter turnout, even as these laws have been passed in various states. There's simply no evidence that these laws suppress black voter turnout. States like Indiana, Georgia, Tennessee have some of the strictest voter ID laws in the country. In those states last year, black voter turnout exceeded white voter turnout. If Republicans are trying to suppress the black vote, they're doing a spectacularly bad job of it.
Okay, look, for Juan Williams to say that for the length of time for early voting to be limited from whatever it was, 17 days to 10 days, I think that's what it was, that is somehow suppressing the vote. It's not. You're supposed to have 1 day, one election day, not 17, not 25, not 10, not 3. And I personally don't have a problem with making it 2 days. On election day, it'd be like Tuesday and Wednesday, or Monday and Tuesday, whatever. Give people a little more time. I don't have a problem with that. But 17 days of early voting is crap. So when you take that back to something more reasonable, and you say, okay, 17 days is ridiculous for early voting, we're going to make it 10. And then, I don't know, 2 or 3 years from now, make it 4 and get it back to what it's supposed to be. If you can't make time to go out and vote, if it's too much of an imposition to go out on election day or get an absentee ballot and mail your vote in, to hell with you. I don't care if you vote. I don't have much time left here, so this is the same video. I want to get to what Charles Krauthammer has to say.
If you have to show up at a DMV office, turn in some documents, and pose for a picture, that is not too much to ask from somebody who wants to vote.
That's why I think the claim that it's unconstitutional is simply not going to hold up.
At least on that point. We're talking voter ID.
Which is the major point. That's usually the sticking point in all of these cases, and it's also the political point. But there's one aspect of the political argument that I think is missed. The left gets the prestige of this by saying that its position is to prevent people from losing the right to vote, from being disenfranchised. But if you go to the polls and you vote for A, and by a fraud, say an illegal immigrant or somebody who voted already votes for candidate B, your vote for A has been canceled. So in effect, you also have been deprived of your vote. So I think it ought to be seen in those terms. You know, there are ways of depriving another person of the vote. A is to stop them. Second is to cancel the vote by allowing illegal and fraudulent voting. So I think there's an equal moral standing on the two sides.
Let me just suggest there is no evidence of any such thing going on.
Okay, so once again, here's Juan Williams with the Democrat Party line, the talking point. Well, this isn't happening yet. Well, it is happening. We just don't have statistics, but we know that it's happening. We know that there is voter fraud. All across the country, there is voter fraud. And people are being prosecuted for voter fraud and for election fraud. But why should we have to wait until it becomes a terrible problem? Let's put a law in place, which is a very reasonable law. You got to be able to identify yourself, carry your photo identification, and be able to identify yourself at the voting booth.
There is no evidence of any such thing going on. There's no evidence, and in fact, Governor McCrory went so far as to say undetected fraud because he has no evidence of any fraud.
I will say to that point, Greg Abbott, the Attorney General who's now running for governor down in Texas, says that they have prosecuted many of these cases. In Florida, we've seen the same thing. I don't know about North Carolina, but it does happen.
It happens. Oh, no. Everything happens. People fall off buildings. People, fall off bridges. But
people fall off buildings? What does that have to do with the issue? Yeah, I'll answer my own questions. Nothing. It has nothing to do with the issue.
But I'm saying as a matter of influencing or changing an election outcome, when was the last time we heard about that?
You think that somebody casting a ballot fraudulently is as infrequent as somebody falling off a bridge?
Correct.
I think you have fallen off a bridge.
Oh, no.
In believing that.
No one's falling off a bridge.
Our elections aren't clean, and every attempt to
believe me, we
have
fly-spec surveillance of our elections in this country, and if there was any evidence that any Democrat was pursuing cheating in this manner, boy, would Republicans be ballistic, Charles.
Republicans are ballistic. You can characterize me as ballistic today on the show. This has been relatively ballistic compared with most of the shows that I've done through the years. I'm Jimmy Z. I'll be back next time. Thanks for listening. Until then, from the left coast. Bye-bye for now, everybody.
The Jimmy Z Show.